I never thought I'd see the day when my own home would feel like enemy territory. For 9 years, my wife Susan and I had opened our doors to my son Brian and his wife Jessica, believing that family meant sacrifice, that love meant putting others first, no matter the cost. That Thursday morning on Susan's 57th birthday, I learned just how wrong I'd been. Please subscribe to the channel and write in the comments what city you're watching from. Susan had been excited about her birthday for weeks. At 57, she didn't ask for much anymore, just a simple celebration with family, maybe her favorite chocolate cake from the bakery downtown. She'd spent the morning cleaning the house, humming softly as she arranged fresh flowers in the living room. I watched her from the kitchen doorway, thinking how beautiful she still looked when she smiled, how the years had been kind to her gentle spirit. Jessica emerged from the guest bedroom around noon, which had become her routine since moving in. She never helped with breakfast, never offered to assist with household chores, but always appeared just in time to criticize whatever Susan had prepared. That day she wore that familiar expression of barely concealed irritation, the one that made my stomach tighten with dread. "The cake's on the counter," Susan said cheerfully, gesturing toward the beautiful chocolate creation she'd picked up that morning. "I thought we could have it after lunch, maybe take some pictures together." Jessica's eyes fixed on the cake with the kind of cold assessment I'd grown to recognize. She walked over slowly, circling it like a predator evaluating prey. Susan stood nearby, her hands clasped together in that nervous way she'd developed over the past few years, waiting for approval that never came. "Did you wash your hands before touching the box?" Jessica asked, her voice sharp with accusation. Susan's smile faltered slightly. "Of course, I always wash my hands before handling food." "I saw you petting that stray cat outside earlier," Jessica continued, her voice rising. "Then you came straight in here without washing properly. You probably got germs all over everything." I felt my jaw clench, but Susan just laughed it off the way she always did. "Honey, I washed my hands twice. The cake is fine. I promise." That's when it happened. Jessica stepped forward, and before any of us could react, she shoved Susan backward with both hands. My wife stumbled, catching herself against the kitchen counter, her eyes wide with shock and hurt. "Don't touch the cake," Jessica screamed, her face contorted with rage. "Your disgusting hands will contaminate everything. I can't believe how careless and filthy you are." The silence that followed felt like the moment after lightning strikes, when the thunder hasn't hit yet but you know it's coming. Susan stood frozen against the counter, one hand pressed to her chest where Jessica had pushed her, tears beginning to form in her eyes. In that moment, watching my wife's birthday joy crumble into humiliation, something inside me snapped. I'd watched Jessica undermine Susan for years, always with plausible excuses, always with Brian defending her afterward. The constant criticism disguised as helpful suggestions, the way she'd rearrange Susan's belongings, claiming to be organizing, how she'd invite her own friends over without asking, treating our home like her personal entertainment space, the gradual erosion of Susan's confidence, her increasing nervousness around her own possessions. But this was different. This was physical. This was my wife being assaulted in her own kitchen on her birthday by someone we'd sheltered and supported for nearly a decade. My blood felt like ice water in my veins as I pulled out my phone. Brian was at the construction site, probably in the middle of managing his crew, but I didn't care. Some things couldn't wait for convenient timing. He answered on the second ring, his voice distracted and professional. "Hey Dad, can this wait? We're right in the middle of pouring concrete and I need to supervise. Get home now." The words came out quiet, controlled, but with an edge that cut through his protests. In the background, I could hear machinery running, men shouting instructions, the busy sounds of a construction site in full operation. "What's wrong? Did someone get hurt? Your wife just pushed your mother." The line went silent except for the distant construction noise. I could picture Brian's face, the way his eyebrows would furrow when he was trying to process unexpected information, the slight pause he always took before responding to family conflict. "Dad, what exactly happened? Maybe there was a misunderstanding." That's when I said the 3 words that would change everything. 3 words that carried the weight of 9 years of accumulated frustration, disappointment, and finally, clarity. "Choose right now." The line went dead. I could hear the dial tone buzzing in my ear, but I didn't move to hang up. Jessica stood in our kitchen, still breathing hard from her outburst, her eyes darting between Susan and me with the calculating look of someone trying to determine how much trouble she was in. Susan remained pressed against the counter, tears streaming down her face, not from physical pain, but from the deeper wound of betrayal. This was supposed to be her day, her simple celebration, and it had been destroyed by the very person we'd treated like a daughter. The house felt different in that moment, charged with the electricity of change. Everything that had been building for 9 years, every small compromise and swallowed insult, every time we'd chosen peace over principle, had led to this single moment of truth. Brian would be home in 20 minutes, and when he walked through that door, our family would never be the same. 23 minutes later, Brian's truck pulled into our driveway with the kind of aggressive speed that told me my 3 words had hit their target. Through the window, I watched him slam the door and stride toward the house with the determined gait of a man who believed he was coming to rescue his wife from unreasonable in-laws. Jessica had spent those 23 minutes transforming herself. Gone was the rage-filled woman who had assaulted my wife. In her place stood a picture of wounded innocence, sitting at our kitchen table with carefully arranged tears in her eyes, her hands folded in a pose of patient suffering. Susan had retreated to our bedroom after I'd suggested she wash her face and try to calm down. I'd helped her to the stairs, my hand on her elbow, feeling how she trembled with each step. 57 years old, and she was shaking like a frightened child in her own home. The front door opened without a knock. That alone told me everything I needed to know about Brian's mindset. He burst into the kitchen where Jessica sat waiting, his work boots still muddy from the construction site, his face flushed with righteous anger. "What the hell happened here?" he demanded, looking from Jessica to me. Jessica called me crying, saying there was some kind of confrontation. I felt a cold smile touch my lips. Of course she'd called him. Of course she'd gotten her version of events to him first, planting seeds of doubt about what I might say. "Your wife physically assaulted your mother," I said calmly. "On her birthday, in our kitchen." She shoved Susan backward and screamed about her hands being disgusting. Brian's eyes immediately went to Jessica, who had perfected the art of looking both hurt and brave. "Baby, what really happened?" "I was concerned about hygiene," Jessica said, her voice soft and reasonable. "Susan had been outside petting that stray cat, and then she went straight to handling the birthday cake without washing her hands properly. When I tried to discuss it with her, she became very defensive and hostile. The way she twisted the truth was masterful. Not quite lying, but reshaping reality until the victim became the aggressor, until concern became attack, until assault became self-defense. She pushed Mom," I said, my voice harder now. "Physically pushed her. I may have gestured for her to step back," Jessica admitted, her tone suggesting this was a minor detail. "I was trying to protect the food everyone would be eating. I didn't realize she was so unsteady on her feet." Brian nodded, already accepting this version of events. I'd watched this pattern for years. Jessica's ability to present herself as the reasonable one, the one who was just trying to help, just trying to maintain standards, just trying to keep the peace. "Where's Mom now?" Brian asked. "Upstairs, trying to recover from being attacked in her own home on her birthday." "Dad, you're being dramatic. Jessica was just trying to prevent food contamination. You know how Mom can be about cleanliness sometimes." That's when I realized the depth of Jessica's manipulation. She hadn't just been undermining Susan to her face. She'd been poisoning Brian's perception of his own mother for years, planting suggestions that Susan was careless, oversensitive, difficult to live with. "How can your mother be about cleanliness?" I repeated. "The woman who raised you? The woman who kept our home spotless for 30 years? The woman who's been cleaning up after your wife for 9 years without complaint?" Brian's face reddened. "Look, I know you're upset, but Jessica has legitimate concerns. She's been trying to help Mom improve her habits, and Mom takes it personally instead of appreciating the guidance." The words hit me like physical blows. My son, the boy I'd taught to ride a bike, to throw a baseball, to treat women with respect, was standing in my kitchen defending the woman who had just assaulted his mother, while describing his mother as someone who needed improvement. "Brian," I said quietly, "I want you to listen very carefully to what I'm about to say." Something in my tone must have penetrated his defensive wall, because he stopped talking and looked at me directly for the first time since he'd arrived. 9 years ago, when you asked if you and Jessica could stay here temporarily while you saved for a house, your mother and I said yes, because family helps family. We gave you our guest room, our privacy, our peace of mind. We adjusted our retirement plans, our daily routines, our entire lives to accommodate you both. Jessica shifted uncomfortably in her chair, but Brian remained focused on me. Your mother has cooked probably 3,000 meals for your wife. She's done Jessica's laundry, cleaned around her belongings, given up her craft room so Jessica could have a home office. Susan has been more patient and generous with Jessica than she ever was with her own daughters. Dad, we've tried to contribute. I'm not finished. My voice carried the authority I'd once used when Brian was 12 and had broken a neighbor's window. Today, on your mother's 57th birthday, your wife physically pushed her and screamed about her hands being disgusting, and your response, instead of apologizing and defending your mother, is to explain why Jessica was justified. The kitchen fell silent except for the humming of our refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic outside. Jessica's carefully arranged expression began to slip slightly as she realized her manipulation wasn't working as smoothly as usual. I need you to make a choice, Brian, I continued, right now, in this moment. You can either acknowledge that what Jessica did was wrong, apologize on her behalf, and commit to making sure it never happens again, or you can continue defending the indefensible. Brian's mouth opened and closed twice before any words came out. Dad, you're asking me to choose between my wife and my parents. No, I said, surprised by how calm my voice sounded. I'm asking you to choose between right and wrong. Your wife assaulted your mother. That's not opinion or interpretation, that's fact. Jessica stood up suddenly, her chair scraping against our kitchen floor. I think we need some space to cool down. This conversation is getting too heated. Sit down, I said, without looking at her. You don't get to call a timeout in the middle of taking responsibility for your actions. For the first time since I'd known her, Jessica looked genuinely uncertain. She sat back down, but her composure was cracking. Brian ran his hands through his hair, a gesture he'd inherited from me, one I recognized as his way of buying time when he didn't know what to say. What do you want from us, Dad? The question hung in the air like smoke. What did I want? An apology seemed too small. Promises felt meaningless after 9 years of broken boundaries. Money couldn't repair the damage to Susan's spirit or restore the peace of our home. I looked at my son, this man I'd raised to be better than this, and realized that Jessica hadn't just been manipulating Susan. She'd been systematically destroying Brian's ability to recognize right from wrong, good from evil, family from enemy. But it was too late for gradual solutions. Too late for family therapy or gentle conversations or patient understanding. I want you both out of our house, I said. Tonight. The silence that followed my ultimatum felt like standing in the eye of a hurricane. Brian's face went through a series of expressions: shock, disbelief, anger, and finally, something that looked almost like relief. Jessica, however, had gone completely still, her manipulative tears forgotten as she calculated her next move. You can't be serious, Brian said finally. This is our home too. We've lived here for 9 years. No, I corrected him. This is our home. You've been guests. Guests who've worn out their welcome. Jessica found her voice then, and when she spoke, the careful facade of hurt innocence was completely gone. You can't just throw us out on the street, John. We have rights. We've been contributing to this household. Contributing. I felt a bitter laugh escape my throat. You've paid us $200 a month for 9 years. Do you know what $200 covers in a house this size? Maybe the electric bill, maybe. The numbers were stark when laid out like that. $200 monthly for a 3-bedroom house with utilities, meals, and full access to all amenities. I'd never calculated it before because I hadn't wanted to make my son feel like a burden. Now I realized that by not discussing money honestly, I'd enabled them to take our generosity for granted. We've helped with groceries, Brian protested, but his voice lacked conviction. Occasionally. When Susan specifically asked you to pick something up on your way home. Jessica hasn't bought groceries for this household in over 2 years. I could see Brian doing mental calculations, probably for the first time realizing how much his parents had been subsidizing his adult life. But Jessica was already moving to her next strategy. This is about more than today, isn't it? She said, her voice taking on a psychological tone I'd heard her use before, when she wanted to sound professional and insightful. This has been building up for months. John, I think you're having some kind of breakdown. The audacity of it took my breath away. She was trying to pathologize my reasonable response to her assault on my wife. A breakdown, I repeated. Is that what you call it when someone finally stands up to your manipulation? I think you're going through something, she continued, speaking slowly as if I were a child having a tantrum. Maybe it's stress from work or age-related changes, but this level of anger isn't healthy. We should probably discuss getting you some professional help. Brian was nodding along, and I realized this wasn't the first time they'd discussed my supposed mental state. How many conversations had they had about my fitness, my stability, my ability to make decisions about my own home? "Where's Mom?" Brian asked. "I think we need to talk to her about this. Maybe she can help you see reason." "Your mother is upstairs crying because your wife assaulted her on her birthday," I said. "She's not coming down here to be subjected to more abuse." "Abuse?" Jessica's voice pitched higher. "John, I think you need to be very careful about the words you're using. Making false accusations about abuse can have serious legal consequences." The threat was subtle but clear. I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized how thoroughly she'd been planning for this moment. The way she'd isolated Susan, undermined her confidence, positioned herself as the reasonable one. The way she'd been painting me as unstable, unreasonable, possibly dangerous. "Are you threatening me in my own home?" I asked. "I'm trying to help you understand that your perception of events might not be accurate," she replied smoothly. "Sometimes when people are under stress, they can misinterpret normal interactions as something more sinister." Brian was watching this exchange with growing uncertainty. I could see him trying to process the conflict between his loyalty to Jessica and the growing evidence that something was very wrong with her behavior. That's when Susan appeared at the bottom of the stairs. She'd changed out of her birthday dress into jeans and a sweater, but I could see she'd been crying. Her eyes were red-rimmed, and she moved with the careful precision of someone trying to hold themselves together. "Susan," Jessica said immediately, her voice switching to warm concern. "I'm so sorry about our misunderstanding earlier. I think your husband is feeling overwhelmed, and it's causing him to blow things out of proportion." My wife looked at Jessica for a long moment, then at Brian, then at me. When she spoke, her voice was quieter than usual, but steady. "There was no misunderstanding, Jessica. You pushed me. You called my hands disgusting. You ruined my birthday cake and made me feel like a stranger in my own home." Jessica's mouth opened to protest, but Susan held up her hand. "I need to say something, and I need everyone to listen without interrupting." The authority in her voice surprised all of us. This wasn't the Susan who'd been tiptoeing around Jessica's moods for years. This was the woman who'd raised 2 successful children, managed a household, and worked as a school secretary for 25 years. For 9 years, I've been making excuses for behavior I knew was wrong. When Jessica rearranged my kitchen cabinets without asking, I told myself she was trying to help. When she criticized my cooking, my cleaning, my appearance, I told myself she had higher standards. When she invited her friends over without checking with us first, I told myself she was just being social. Brian started to speak, but Susan's look stopped him. When she began excluding me from conversations in my own living room, talking over me when I tried to participate, I told myself I was being too sensitive. When she started answering my phone and taking messages without telling me, I told myself she was being helpful. When she moved my personal belongings and forgot to tell me where she'd put them, I told myself she was organizing. With each example, I watched Jessica's expression grow more controlled, more calculating. She wasn't showing remorse or recognition. She was planning her defense. But today, when she put her hands on me and called me disgusting, I realized something. I've been living like a guest in my own home, walking on eggshells around someone who has no respect for me, for this house, or for the sacrifices John and I have made. Susan turned to Brian, and I could see the pain in her eyes. "Brian, I love you. You're my son, and nothing will ever change that. But your wife has been systematically making me feel unwelcome in my own home for years. And today, she crossed a line that can't be uncrossed." "Mom, I think you're being unfair," Brian said, but his voice lacked its earlier conviction. "Jessica's been trying to help make the house more efficient, more organized. Maybe her methods aren't perfect, but her intentions are good." "Efficient?" Susan's voice carried a note of incredulity. "Brian, she threw away my recipe box last month because she said handwritten cards were unsanitary. Those were recipes from your grandmother, from my mother, recipes I'd collected for 30 years. The color drained from Brian's face. "She said you'd given them to her to organize." "I never said any such thing. I came home from grocery shopping and found them in the trash. When I asked Jessica about it, she said they were taking up too much space. and that I could find anything I needed online. I felt my anger returning, colder and more focused than before. "You didn't tell me about the recipes." "I didn't tell you about a lot of things," Susan admitted. "I kept thinking that if I just tried harder, if I was more understanding, if I didn't rock the boat, things would get better. But they haven't gotten better. They've gotten worse." Jessica finally spoke, her voice carefully modulated. "Susan, I think you're remembering some of these incidents differently than they happened. Grief can affect memory, and I know you've been struggling with some depression." "Don't." The word came out of Susan like a gunshot. "Don't you dare try to gaslight me about my own experiences in my own home." The room fell silent again. Jessica's mask had slipped completely now, and for the first time I saw her as she really was, not the helpful daughter-in-law or the concerned family member, but a predator who'd been systematically destroying my wife's sense of reality. Brian looked like a man watching his world collapse. "Mum, I didn't know about the recipes. I didn't know about any of this, because she's been very careful to make sure you didn't know," Susan replied. "Every complaint I might have made was already reframed as my oversensitivity, my resistance to change, my difficulty accepting help." I watched my son's face as understanding began to dawn. 9 years of Jessica's explanations for his mother's behavior suddenly looked different in this new light. "We're leaving," I said quietly. "Tonight. Both of you." This time, nobody argued. What followed was the longest 3 hours of my life. Jessica and Brian retreated to their room, where I could hear intense, whispered conversations, punctuated by occasional raised voices. Susan and I sat in our living room, not talking much, just processing the magnitude of what had happened and what was about to happen. Around 6 in the evening, they emerged with suitcases and boxes, moving with the efficient urgency of people who'd suddenly realized their situation was more precarious than they'd imagined. Brian's face was drawn and confused, like a man waking up from a dream he couldn't quite remember. Jessica, however, had regained her composure and was operating with the focused determination of someone executing a plan. "We'll need a few days to find a place," Brian said as he loaded boxes into his truck. "Maybe we could stay until—" "No," I said firmly. "You'll stay in a hotel tonight. You can come back tomorrow evening to get more of your things, but only when both Susan and I are here." Jessica appeared in the doorway carrying what looked like several of Susan's kitchen items mixed in with her own belongings. Susan noticed too. "Jessica, that's my stand mixer," Susan said quietly. "Oh, I thought this was the one we bought last Christmas," Jessica replied smoothly. "I'll leave it if you're sure it's yours." But Susan was already walking over, recognizing other items in the box. "That's my grandmother's silver serving set, and my good measuring cups, the ones with the blue handles." "I must have grabbed the wrong things in my rush," Jessica said, but her eyes had gone cold and calculating. So easy to get confused when everything's been mixed together for so long. I realized then that this wasn't confusion or honest mistake. Jessica had been strategically taking things, probably for months, maybe years. Small items that might not be immediately missed, valuable things that could be explained away as gifts or mix-ups. "Empty the box," I said. "Excuse me?" "Empty the box. All of it. Let's see what else you've confused for your own belongings." For a moment, I thought Jessica might refuse. Her jaw tightened, and she looked toward Brian for support. But something in my expression must have warned her that this wasn't the time for games. The contents of the box told a story of systematic theft disguised as borrowing. Susan's jewelry box that had been missing for 6 months, a set of crystal glasses that had been wedding gifts, several books with Susan's name written inside the covers, even small appliances that Jessica claimed she'd purchased, but which Susan recognized as items that had simply disappeared from our kitchen over time. Brian stared at the pile with growing horror. "Jessica, what is all this?" "These are things that were given to me or that I bought, and Susan is confusing for her own items," Jessica said, but the explanation sounded weak even to her. Susan picked up her grandmother's jewelry box and opened it. Empty. She looked at Jessica with an expression I'd never seen before. Not anger, but a kind of sad recognition. "Where are my grandmother's earrings? The ones with the small diamonds?" "I don't know what you're talking about. They were in this box. I checked on them 2 weeks ago." Jessica's silence stretched too long. Brian was looking between his wife and his mother with the expression of a man watching his life unravel in real time. "Check her jewelry case," Susan said quietly. "The one in their bedroom." "I'm not searching through my wife's belongings based on accusations," Brian protested, but his voice lacked conviction. Then ask her to show you, Susan replied. Ask her to prove she didn't take them. Jessica's face had gone pale, but she lifted her chin defiantly. I don't have to prove anything, this is harassment. That's when Brian surprised all of us. Show me your jewelry case, Jessica. Brian, you can't be serious. Show me. The journey to their bedroom felt like a funeral procession. Jessica walked ahead of us, her back rigid with anger. Brian followed with the reluctant steps of a man approaching his own execution, and Susan and I brought up the rear. Jessica's jewelry case sat on the dresser, an expensive leather box I'd never paid much attention to before. When Brian opened it, the first thing we saw were the diamond earrings Susan had described, nestled in a compartment alongside several other pieces I recognized as belonging to my wife. The silence that followed was deafening. I can explain, Jessica said quickly. Susan gave me these things. She said she wanted me to have them. When? Susan asked. When did I give you my grandmother's earrings? Last month. You said they looked better on me than they did on you. I haven't worn those earrings in 2 years because I couldn't find them, Susan replied. I thought I'd misplaced them. Brian was staring at the jewelry case like it might explode. Jessica, these aren't yours. Your mother has been getting confused lately. She forgets things, gives things away, and then doesn't remember. I was actually trying to keep her jewelry safe until she was thinking more clearly. The gaslighting was breathtaking in its audacity. Even faced with undeniable evidence, Jessica was trying to reframe theft as protection, manipulation as kindness. Get out, I said quietly. John, I think you need to calm down. Get out of my house! The shout came from somewhere deep in my chest, carrying 9 years of suppressed anger, frustration, and protective rage. Jessica actually stepped backward, and for the first time since I'd known her, she looked genuinely afraid. Brian was still staring at the jewelry case. How long have you been taking things? I haven't been taking anything. Your parents are confused and suspicious, and they're trying to turn you against me. But Brian was already moving, opening drawers, checking Jessica's closet. Each search revealed more items that belonged to Susan, to our household. Things that had gone missing over the years and been written off as misplaced or lost. A silk scarf that had been an anniversary gift from me to Susan. A small clock that had belonged to my mother. Even practical items like good kitchen knives and a set of bath towels that Susan had been looking for just last week. My God, Brian whispered. Jessica, what have you been doing? I've been living in this house for 9 years, Jessica snapped, her careful facade finally cracking completely. 9 years of being treated like a second-class citizen, of having every meal I cook criticized, every suggestion I make dismissed, every attempt to improve this place blocked by your precious mother's feelings. The venom in her voice was shocking. This was the real Jessica, the one she'd kept hidden behind smiles and helpful gestures and concerned expressions. I've earned every single thing in that case, she continued. I've cleaned this house, cooked meals, dealt with your mother's passive-aggressive nonsense for almost a decade. Those things are compensation for services rendered. Compensation? Susan's voice was barely a whisper. You think stealing from me is compensation? I think surviving in this house with your martyr act and his controlling behavior deserves some kind of reward. Brian looked like he'd been slapped. Controlling behavior? Oh, please, Jessica laughed, but it was an ugly sound. You think this is about today? About one little push? This has been building for years. Your father watches every move I make, questions every decision, makes me feel like a prisoner in my own home. This isn't your home, I said. It is my home, she screamed. I've lived here longer than some people live in apartments they rent. I've put up with your wife's neurotic cleaning schedules, your boring dinner conversations, your pathetic retirement hobbies, your complete inability to understand that some people have higher standards than settling for mediocrity. The mask was completely off now. 9 years of resentment poured out in a torrent of contempt and entitlement that left no doubt about what she really thought of us, of our home, of our lives. Brian was backing away from her, his face pale with shock and recognition. You need to leave, he said quietly. Right now. We need to leave, Jessica corrected. We're married, Brian. These people have been poisoning you against me for years, and now you're finally seeing their manipulation for what it is. But Brian was shaking his head. No, Jessica, you need to leave. I need time to think about all of this. For the first time since I'd known her, Jessica looked genuinely panicked. Her control over the situation, over Brian, over the narrative, was slipping away. "You can't choose them over me," she said desperately. "I'm your wife. We have plans, a future together. These people are old and stuck in the past. I'm the one who's been encouraging you to reach for more, to be better than this." Brian looked around the bedroom, at the evidence of years of systematic theft, at the woman he'd married defending stealing from his own mother. "Pack your things," he said quietly. "All of your things. Nothing that belongs to this house." Jessica stared at him for a long moment, and I saw the exact instant when she realized she'd lost. Her expression went from desperate to calculating to coldly furious. "Fine," she said, "but don't expect me to make this easy for any of you." Jessica's threat turned out to be more serious than any of us anticipated. She left that Thursday night with 3 suitcases and a rental car, but not before making one final stop at our home office computer. I discovered what she'd done the next morning when I tried to check our email and found that our internet service had been disconnected, our credit cards had been reported as stolen, and someone had filed a complaint with Adult Protective Services claiming that Susan was being financially and emotionally abused by her husband. The APS investigator arrived at our door on Friday afternoon, a serious-looking woman in her 40s who introduced herself as Margaret Torres. She carried a clipboard and wore the expression of someone who'd seen too much human cruelty to be easily surprised. "Mr. Anderson, I'm here to investigate reports of elder abuse in this household," she said. "I'll need to speak with both you and your wife separately, and I'll need to examine your financial records and living conditions." My stomach dropped. Jessica's final revenge was more sophisticated than I'd given her credit for. She hadn't just made accusations, she'd weaponized the system designed to protect vulnerable adults against us. "Of course," I said, stepping aside to let her in. "Though I should tell you, the person who made this report was asked to leave our home yesterday after she assaulted my wife." Margaret Torres made a note on her clipboard. "I'll need to hear all the details, Mr. Anderson. But first, where is Mrs. Anderson?" Susan was in the kitchen, still wearing the same clothes she'd slept in, her hair unbrushed and her eyes red from crying. She looked exactly like someone who might be suffering from abuse, and I realized how carefully Jessica had timed this complaint. The investigation that followed was thorough and humiliating. Margaret Torres examined our bank accounts, our medical records, our prescription medications. She took photographs of our living spaces, interviewed us separately about our daily routines, our relationship history, our family dynamics. "Mrs. Anderson," I heard her saying to Susan in the living room while I waited in the kitchen, "I need you to be completely honest with me. Has your husband ever threatened you, controlled your access to money, or prevented you from seeing friends or family?" "Never," Susan replied, her voice stronger than it had been in days. "John has never been anything but kind and supportive. The person who made this report is my daughter-in-law, who was asked to leave our home after she physically pushed me and stole several valuable items from our household." When Margaret Torres interviewed me, her questions were pointed and specific. "Mr. Anderson, your daughter-in-law claims that you've been exhibiting controlling behavior, monitoring her activities, and creating a hostile environment. She also says your wife has been showing signs of dementia and that you've been taking advantage of her confusion." The sophistication of Jessica's accusations was breathtaking. She'd positioned herself as the concerned family member, trying to protect Susan from an abusive husband, while simultaneously suggesting that Susan's mental state made her an unreliable witness to her own experiences. "My wife is not suffering from dementia," I said carefully. "She's been upset because she was assaulted in her own home by someone she'd treated like a daughter for 9 years. As for controlling behavior, I asked Jessica to leave after discovering she'd been systematically stealing from us. Can you provide evidence of this alleged theft?" That's when I realized Jessica's true cleverness. By taking things gradually over years, by mixing her belongings with ours, by claiming items had been gifts or loans, she'd made it nearly impossible to prove theft without looking like the controlling, suspicious person she'd accused me of being. "We recovered some items from her possession yesterday," I said. "My wife's jewelry, some household items, but most of what she took over the years, we can't prove because we didn't realize it was missing until yesterday." Margaret Torres spent 4 hours in our home. She spoke with our neighbors, called our family doctor, even contacted the bank to verify that Susan had full access to our accounts and had been actively managing our finances. Finally, as the sun was setting, She sat us both down in our living room. "Based on my investigation, I'm finding no evidence of abuse or neglect in this household," she said. "Mrs. Anderson appears to be mentally competent and in control of her own decisions. Your financial records show joint management and no unusual transactions. Your neighbors describe you as a quiet, considerate couple." The relief I felt was overwhelming, but Margaret Torres wasn't finished. "However, I want you both to understand that this complaint will remain on file. If there are future reports, they will be taken very seriously. I also want to suggest that you might benefit from family counseling to help process the conflict with your daughter-in-law." After she left, Susan and I sat in our living room in stunned silence. The magnitude of Jessica's vindictiveness was still sinking in. She hadn't just tried to hurt us, she'd tried to destroy our reputations, our credibility, our standing in the community. "She could have had us arrested," Susan said quietly. "If that investigator had believed her story, they could have separated us, put us in different facilities, taken control of our finances." I felt cold as I realized how close we'd come to losing everything. Jessica's plan had been diabolical in its simplicity. Use the system designed to protect elderly people to punish us for standing up to her abuse. That evening, Brian called. His voice sounded hollow, exhausted. "Dad, I need to tell you something. Jessica's been contacting people, telling them you and Mom are having some kind of breakdown. She called my boss, my sister, even some of our neighbors. She's saying you threw her out without cause, and that she's concerned about Mom's mental health." "We had a visit from Adult Protective Services today," I told him. The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long, I thought the call had dropped. "She reported you to APS." Brian's voice was barely a whisper. "Filed a complaint yesterday, probably right after she left here. Claimed I was abusing Mom financially and emotionally." Jesus Christ. I could hear Brian breathing heavily. "Dad, I had no idea she would. I knew she was angry, but this is who she really is," I said. "This is what your mother and I have been dealing with for 9 years, just in smaller doses. I'm so sorry. I'm so fucking sorry." Brian was crying now, something I hadn't heard since he was a child. "I should have seen it. I should have protected you both." "Where is she now?" I asked. "I don't know. She cleaned out our joint checking account yesterday and disappeared. She left her wedding ring on the dresser with a note saying I'd chosen my parents over her and that she was done pretending to be part of this family." The relief I felt was tempered by concern for my son. Despite everything Jessica had done, Brian had loved her, or thought he had. The betrayal he was experiencing would take time to heal. "What are you going to do?" I asked. "I don't know. File for divorce, I guess. Try to figure out how much of our relationship was real and how much was manipulation. Try to understand how I could have been so blind to what she was doing to you and Mom." "You weren't blind," I said gently. "You were being manipulated by an expert. She's very good at what she does. That doesn't excuse anything. I chose her over my own mother. I defended someone who was stealing from you, lying to me, abusing the people who raised me. How do I come back from that?" It was a fair question, and one I didn't have an easy answer for. The damage Jessica had done to our family would take time to repair, if it could be repaired at all. "We start by being honest about what happened," I said. "We acknowledge the damage that was done and we work to rebuild trust. It won't be quick and it won't be easy, but we're still family." "Are we?" Brian asked. "After everything I've done, everything I failed to see, everything I failed to protect you from, are we still family?" Susan took the phone from my hand. "Brian, this is your mother. You listen to me. What Jessica did to us, she also did to you. She isolated you from us just as effectively as she isolated us from you. The difference is, we knew something was wrong. You didn't have that perspective because you were living inside her manipulation. But you should have had a wife who loved and respected your family," Susan interrupted. "You should have had a partner who was honest with you. You should have had someone who built bridges instead of burning them. The fact that you didn't isn't your fault. I love you, Mom. I love you both, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life making this up to you." "You don't owe us anything," Susan said softly. "You just need to heal from what she did to you, the same way we're healing from what she did to us." After the call ended, Susan and I sat together on our couch, holding hands in the lamplight of our living room. Our house felt different. Quieter, yes, but also lighter. The constant tension, the walking on eggshells, the feeling of being watched and judged in our own home, all of that was gone. But Jessica's final attack had revealed something important. She'd been planning for this confrontation for a long time. The theft, the manipulation, the isolation, even the accusations of abuse. These weren't spontaneous reactions to being asked to leave. They were the culmination of a long-term strategy to position herself advantageously if she was ever challenged. She never loved any of us, Susan said quietly. Not Brian, not us. We were just resources to be used. I squeezed her hand. But she's gone now and she's not coming back. Neither of us knew then that Jessica had one final card to play. 3 weeks after Jessica disappeared, she returned with a lawyer, a locksmith, and a claim that she had legal rights to our home as a long-term resident. She also had something else. Pregnancy test results dated 2 days after she'd left our house. I was in the garage working on my workbench when I heard voices in our driveway. Through the window, I saw Jessica standing next to a black sedan, talking to a man in an expensive suit who was holding a briefcase and looking at our house like he was assessing its value. My first instinct was to call the police, but something about their casual demeanor made me pause. They weren't acting like trespassers. They were acting like people who had a right to be there. I walked around to the front of the house where Susan was standing on our porch, her face pale with shock. The lawyer, a thin man with silver hair and cold eyes, was reading from a legal document. Mrs. Anderson, as I was explaining, my client has established residency in this property over 9 years of continuous habitation. Under state tenant protection laws, she cannot be evicted without proper legal process, which was not followed in her removal from the premises. She wasn't a tenant, I said, joining Susan on the porch. She was a guest who was asked to leave after assaulting my wife. The lawyer looked up from his papers with the expression of someone who'd expected this objection. Mr. Anderson, residency rights aren't determined by rental agreements. They're determined by length of habitation, establishment of the address as primary residence, and contribution to household maintenance. My client meets all these criteria. Jessica stepped forward then, her hand resting protectively on her stomach, in a gesture so theatrical it might have been choreographed. "I'm also pregnant with your son's child," she announced, "and I refuse to allow my baby to be born homeless because of your vindictive behavior." The words hit me like a physical blow. Pregnant. Of course she was pregnant. It was the perfect final manipulation, the one thing that might force Brian to take her back, that might give her legal and emotional leverage over our entire family. "When?" Susan asked quietly. "I'm 6 weeks along," Jessica replied. "I found out after you threw me out onto the street. I've been living in my car trying to figure out how to survive while carrying your grandchild." The lies came so smoothly, wrapped in just enough truth to be believable. She probably was pregnant. Jessica was too smart to fake something that could be easily verified. But the timeline, the homelessness, the sob story about living in her car while she'd clearly hired an expensive lawyer, all of it was calculated manipulation. "You cleaned out Brian's bank account and disappeared," I said. "You haven't been living in your car." "I took what I was entitled to as his wife," Jessica replied. "Money I needed to secure legal representation and protect myself and my unborn child from further harassment." The lawyer cleared his throat. "Mr. Anderson, my client is prepared to be reasonable. She's not asking to move back into the house permanently. She simply wants to establish a legal framework for shared custody of the property until appropriate custody arrangements can be made for the child." "Shared custody of our house?" I felt my voice rising. "This is our home. We own it. We've owned it for 30 years, and my client has resided in it for 9 of those years, contributing to its maintenance and establishing it as her primary residence. She has rights, Mr. Anderson, whether you acknowledge them or not." I looked at Jessica, standing there with her hand on her stomach, flanked by legal representation, playing the role of the pregnant victim to perfection. This was her endgame, not just to hurt us for daring to stand up to her, but to legally entangle us in years of court battles, while she used her pregnancy as emotional warfare against our entire family. "Where's Brian?" I asked. "Brian has been served with divorce papers," the lawyer said smoothly. "My client is seeking full custody of the unborn child, as well as spousal support and her share of marital assets, including this house," Jessica added, "since it's been our primary residence for our entire marriage." The audacity was breathtaking. She was trying to claim ownership of our home based on having lived in it as a guest. It was exactly the kind of legal manipulation that could tie us up in court for years, costing us thousands in legal fees while she used her pregnancy to pressure Brian into reconciliation. But as I stood there listening to her lawyer's threats and her sob story, I realized something important. Jessica had made one critical mistake. She'd assumed that we were the same people who had enabled her abuse for 9 years, the same people who would choose peace over principle, who would sacrifice anything to avoid conflict. She was wrong. "Susan," I said calmly, "please call Margaret Torres at Adult Protective Services." "Why?" Jessica asked, but I could hear uncertainty in her voice for the first time. "Because 3 weeks ago, you filed a false report claiming I was abusing my wife. That's a serious crime, Jessica. Filing false reports to government agencies, making fraudulent claims about elder abuse, using the legal system to harass innocent people. These are felonies." The lawyer frowned. "Mr. Anderson, I'm not sure what you're implying." "I'm not implying anything. I'm stating facts. Your client filed false reports with Adult Protective Services, stole items from our home, committed identity theft by accessing our accounts without permission, and has now returned with fraudulent legal claims about residency rights." I pulled out my phone and started dialing. "Officer Martinez? This is John Anderson on Maple Street. I need to report someone on my property making false legal claims and harassing my family." "Yes, the same person we discussed last week about the APS complaint." Jessica's face had gone pale. "You can't have me arrested, I'm pregnant." "Being pregnant doesn't exempt you from criminal charges," I replied. "It just makes your behavior more reprehensible." The lawyer was already backing toward his car. "My client will be in touch about scheduling proper legal proceedings through the courts." "Your client will be in touch with a bail bondsman," I said, "because she's about to be arrested for multiple felonies." That's when Brian's truck pulled into our driveway. My son got out slowly, like a man walking to his own execution. He'd lost weight in the 3 weeks since Jessica had left, and he looked older, worn down by the magnitude of what he'd discovered about his marriage. "Brian," Jessica called out, her voice switching immediately to the soft, vulnerable tone she'd always used to manipulate him. "Thank God you're here. Your parents are trying to have me arrested while I'm carrying your child." Brian walked past her without acknowledging her presence and came to stand beside Susan and me on the porch. "Dad," he said quietly, "I've been working with a lawyer too. Jessica forged my signature on several documents, including a home equity loan application, using this house as collateral. She was planning to steal your home from under you." The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. Jessica hadn't just been stealing small items over the years. She'd been positioning herself to steal our entire house. The residency claims, the manipulation of Brian's finances, even the pregnancy, all of it was part of a long-term con designed to separate us from our property and our assets. "The pregnancy is real," Brian continued, his voice flat with exhaustion. "But the baby isn't mine. She admitted it yesterday when I confronted her with evidence of the forged documents. She's been having an affair for over a year." Jessica's mask finally slipped completely. "You bastard," she snarled at Brian. "You weak, pathetic mama's boy. I gave you the best years of my life, and this is how you repay me." "You gave me nothing but lies," Brian replied. 9 years of lies. The police arrived then, 2 officers who'd dealt with our family before. Jessica tried to run, actually tried to flee on foot while wearing heels, but she made it about 30 yards before Officer Martinez caught up with her. As they handcuffed her, she was screaming about persecution, about being pregnant, about her rights. But the sound faded as they put her in the patrol car, and suddenly our driveway was quiet, except for the sound of wind in the trees. The lawyer had disappeared completely, probably understanding that representing someone caught in the act of fraud wasn't good for business. Brian stood with us in the silence that followed, all of us processing the magnitude of what had just ended. 9 years of manipulation, theft and abuse, culminating in an attempted fraud that could have cost us everything. "I'm sorry," Brian said finally. "I'm so sorry for all of it." "You were a victim too," Susan said softly. "We all were." That night, for the first time in 9 years, our house felt like home again. Susan made dinner for just the 3 of us, and we ate at our kitchen table without tension, without walking on eggshells, without the constant undercurrent of hostility that had become normal. Brian stayed for several hours, and we talked honestly about what had happened, about the warning signs we'd all missed or ignored, about how to rebuild our relationships going forward. Jessica was charged with multiple felonies: fraud, identity theft, filing false reports, and attempted grand theft. She pleaded guilty 6 months later in exchange for a reduced sentence and immediate deportation to her country of origin. We never saw her again. Brian moved into a small apartment across town and began the long process of rebuilding his life. The divorce was finalized quickly once Jessica's fraud was discovered, and DNA tests confirmed that the child she was carrying belonged to her affair partner. Susan and I renewed our wedding vows on her 58th birthday, exactly 1 year after Jessica had pushed her in our kitchen. We celebrated with a small ceremony in our backyard, surrounded by friends and family who'd supported us through the ordeal. The house feels different now, lighter, peaceful, truly ours again. We've changed the locks, updated our security system, and made our boundaries crystal clear to everyone in our lives. Never again will we sacrifice our peace for the sake of avoiding conflict. Sometimes people ask us how we could have let the situation go on for so long, how we could have missed the signs of Jessica's true nature. The answer is that manipulation is a gradual process, like a slow-acting poison that builds up in your system until one day you realize you're dying. But we survived. We reclaimed our home, our dignity, and our family. And every morning when I wake up in my own bed, in my own house, next to the woman I've loved for 35 years, I'm grateful for the 3 words that changed everything. Choose right now. Sometimes the most important choices are the ones that force us to stop accepting what's unacceptable, to stop enabling what's destructive, to stop sacrificing our peace for someone else's pathology. We chose ourselves. We chose truth. We chose to believe that we deserved better. And we were right.